If there's one thing I know about me, it's that I'm super annoying around the holiday season. Christmas begins sometime in mid-November, Thanksgiving doesn't count, and Halloween begins earlier every year. And this year, Halloween for me began on September 8th, because that was the day that my friend and I went to go see the remake of Stephen King's It. And I thought it was good. Damn good. Hell, it was refreshing enough to see a big-budget horror film that wasn't produced by Blumhouse or part of the Conjuring cinematic universe. I'm still coming to grips with the fact that that's a thing. Also, the movie had some pretty darn good scares in it. If nothing else, this year's adaptation seemed like a massive improvement on the watered-down, oftentimes hilarious 1990 miniseries.
Do you have Prince Albert in a can? You do? Well, you better let the poor guy out!
God, Tim Curry is just having the time of his life in that movie, isn't he? But I have noticed a criticism of the movie that, while I don't think is unfounded, still irks me because, much like laugh tracks, the criticism is indicative of a problem that once again consists of a decent tool that's being ruined by a lack of nuance. And if you've read the title of this video, you already know what it is, so let's take a look at those oft-called cheap jump scares, what makes them effective, and what makes them, well, cheap. Much like everything in this sort of in defense of series of videos I like doing, I don't have any problem with jump scares as a concept. They can be executed fantastically, but bad uses of jump scares, especially in the last few years, have caused virtually everyone in the world to push back not against movies that exploit jump scares, but the concept of jump scares as a whole, describing all jump scares as hackneyed and low effort. So I'm gonna try to explain with my word vomit about why we should give jump scares a chance. So first, let's actually define what a jump scare is. Sounds like a dumb question, right? You're watching a movie, and then a scene comes on, and then suddenly, boom, a loud noise, and then something jumps out and goes, oh, you get startled, and then you post angry comments on the internet about how this movie sucked because it used jump scares, right? Well, yes, but there are also types of jump scares that don't quite fit that mold. There are certain movies that I can point out that, for all intents and purposes, have jump scares, but they're not really the same thing. And this ambiguous definition is part of what bothers me about this pushback. A jump scare is something that's supposed to make you jump, right? Well, what about those moments in movies that make you jump without the obnoxious loud noise that jump scares have become so synonymous with? Those moments where something unexpected pops on screen accompanied only by a low ambient boom or no sound at all. What do we call these? Silent jump scares? Besides, the whole notion of what makes somebody jump is a subjective idea, not unlike horror itself now that I'm thinking about it. Okay, so instead of talking in terms of what makes us jump, let's take a look at this from a different perspective. These sort of silent jump scares are usually pretty well employed since they're the result of the movie or game being able to draw their audience in, increasing their immersion. And when they realize something out of place, this only draws them in more and keeps them on their toes. The complaint about cheap jump scares, however, is that the loud noise or the obvious fake-outs decrease our immersion. It's the movie's way of telling you, this is when you gotta be scared, okay? In a sense, we're talking about the difference between a work drawing you into an experience and taking you out of an experience. But of course, with a massive negative stigma, I don't mind you asking me what you're thinking right now, which is, well, is there an effective way to use the loud, jumpy jump scare that everyone hates? Well, without naming anything or getting into any specifics, this one, and this one. Now, I'm not going to completely dissect those scenes because it'll rob them of their power if you ever do decide to watch the movies they're from, so instead, I'm going to talk for a bit about something that everyone is probably sick of at this point. Haha, gotcha! This is actually a FNAF video. No, wait, come back, I'll stop being a dick. But say what you want about the series as a whole or its fan base, but I will hold that Five Nights at Freddy's 1 is a marvel of horror gaming, and not celebrating it would be doing the game a massive disservice. But even when the first game came out, it was shunned massively by a lot of people claiming that it's not horror because it used jump scares and that it was nothing but fodder for YouTube Let's Players to scream at. And while that second point isn't entirely untrue, especially for a lot of the rest of the series, let's take a look at the first game in a vacuum. And no, there will be no discussion of dead children or the increasingly infuriating, sprawling plot of these games, so you're safe here. Instead, let's look at the core mechanics of the game. Five Nights at Freddy's is an interesting case study because it manages to get jump scares both right and wrong, and it depends entirely on your playstyle. Okay, so let's ditch all preconceived notions and pretend it's 2014 and you've just seen this game for the first time on the Steam store page. You start playing it for a bit and you're given this sort of setup that you've probably never seen before. Virtually all control is stripped from you and you just have a few buttons to stop something bad from happening to you, but you don't really know what it is. Then all of a sudden you slip up somewhere and BAM! Slapped in the face with a jump scare. Startling, right? But not really horror, which is what most of you were probably thinking right then, but that's not the point. Shut up, I'm getting to it. That first jump scare is the game slapping you in the face and being like, hey, you better straighten up or that's gonna happen again. Got it? I don't know why the game has this voice
This is just what Five Nights at Freddy's sounds like now.
And then you start again, but this time, you know the penalty. And you don't want that to happen again, so you remain vigilant. But then, you screw up again. And then it's just a matter of waiting. Until eventually, there's that startle again. And the game makes sure that it always staggers these jump scares, making you wait somewhere between 0 and 20 seconds before it happens, just to keep you a wee bit on your toes. Sometimes just enough to make you think, well wait, maybe I didn't screw up. Or, if I can survive 10 seconds, I could beat the level, only to be screamed at 5 seconds later. But here's the thing with these games, and the effectiveness of the jump scare as a whole. These are not the horror part of the game. This is. Jump scares are an exercise between setup and payoff. The setup is the horror, while the payoff is the catharsis of letting that tension go. The whole notion of the jump scare is only one part of the recipe that is horror.
But you don't have to take my word for it.
Stephen King, the man closest to what we could probably define of horror personified, once said, "Terror is when you come home and notice everything you own had been taken away and replaced by an exact substitute. It's when the lights go out and you feel something behind you. You hear it. You feel its breath against your ear. But when you turn around, there's nothing there." It should be noted that Stephen King uses the word terror here because he sees terror and horror as two different things, but I don't, and most other people don't, so we're going to ignore that part. But King is a writer. He's able to have his characters feel something behind them, feel the breath on their neck. If you're watching a movie, you don't really have that luxury. So in something like games or film, you first have to set up the expectation that something could jump out and scare you at any moment. Without the threat or the suggestion that something could jump out and scare you, there's significantly less or no tension sometimes. Of course, the stumbling block of Five Nights at Freddy's in particular is that to avoid that lose state and unlock all of the endings, the player has to learn the mechanics of the game down to the nanosecond. And as with anything in horror, once you find out how the sausage gets made, the mystique kinda disappears. And once you learn the mechanics here, Five Nights goes from a unique horror experience to a resource management game with loud noises, and you become desensitized to the whole experience. It's almost as if the best way to experience this game, and maybe every horror game, I haven't really looked into this that deep, is to play it once. Don't learn how it works. Play it just long enough to get through the campaign if you really want to, but don't dissect. Understandably, that's a problem with a horror game that becomes increasingly difficult and basically demands that of the player to get to the completion of stuff, but I never said these games were flawless or that I had any solutions. Yes, I am a cheeky bastard, aren't I? Though, I do have one suggestion that probably could have made this game dodge a lot of criticisms. I know that hindsight is 20/20, but I feel that all you really had to do was this. Right? Making all 5 games into one episodic game just feels more right, doesn't it? Even if it was done retroactively, I feel like it would have dodged a lot of hate. Anyway, I just had to get that point out there, even though it has literally nothing to do with this video. Tangent aside, jump scares are pretty different in games and film. In games, there's this whole other layer of investment since you actively control the character and every interaction you have with the game is your choice. In film, the employment of jump scares can be a bit more difficult, but you can still relate this method to film. If a movie's able to set up the expectation of a jump scare, possibly through the use of one of those aforementioned silent jump scares or a well-executed fake-out that isn't a cat accompanied by a loud noise, hell, The Shining does it with fucking title cards, then the audience will continue the rest of the film a little more tense, always wondering when the next actual scare will happen. And from there, it's up to the discretion of the filmmaker. Maybe it'll happen once or twice, maybe it'll never happen again. But obviously, the last thing the filmmaker wants is to be predictable. Predictability is the jump scare's worst enemy. If I were to speculate, that's why we keep seeing jump scares with no build-up, because they're unexpected. But unexpected isn't necessarily good. If I were walking down the street and I punched the first guy I saw in the face, yeah, it would probably be unexpected, but it probably wouldn't end well for me. It's all about hitting that sweet spot between anticipation and unpredictability. When used sparingly, the jump scare can be incredibly effective, not in being scary on their own, but in amplifying the horror in the moments surrounding them. The scream of a well-executed jump scare can echo through the rest of the film's runtime, always making the audience unsure of when the next will appear, and then that's when you can really start to f**k with them. Have them focus on small details in the scene composition, make the audience think something is definitely gonna happen here, but only have something happen just enough times, maybe like 10% of the time. As I tend to say in all of my videos, I can't defend every single use of jump scares. That's not really my mission statement. I know they can oftentimes come off as obnoxious, and they're frequently used in place of actual tension, which leads to everyone having a negative opinion of them. But again, this video is just to help explain why jump scares themselves aren't at fault for that. As with most genre mechanics, they're a tool in the toolbox, and they're only as good as the hands that use them. Saying that on principle jump scares aren't scary is like saying that a joke isn't funny because you only heard the punchline. Well, of course it's not effective, you're missing half the thing. I'm not gonna complain that my car doesn't work because I only bought some tires and a chair. I mean, I'm gonna need at least 4 more, wooden pallets. Sure. And obviously, I don't think all people sweepingly discredit jump scares, but I've seen enough people dismissing good uses of jump scares enough that I thought that this was worth making a video about. So let me know what jump scares in movies or games that you've seen that were effective. These kinds of topics are pretty difficult to discuss because things like horror and comedy are subjective, and I'm not really talking about any particular director, so I can't get too specific, so let me know. Let's talk in the comments. Also, if you saw this year's remake of it, what did you think of it? While it was the video that kind of inspired me to make this video, I will admit that it does get kind of heavy-handed with the jump scares in certain parts, but I thought for the most part they were pretty good. But what did you think of it? Anyway, pretty sure I've said my piece on this topic, so right now I'm gonna give you some quick-fire recommendations of some of my favorite horror/thriller movies that may or may not include jump scares in them for your Halloween viewing pleasure. The Shining, The Exorcist, The Babadook, 10 Cloverfield Lane, Get Out, The Others. If you've seen all of them, great job. If not, get to it. Happy Halloween.